This is Kurozumi Orochi, one of the most universally despised creatures in all of fictional and non-fictional media, but for all of the right reasons, as he is one of the greatest and most underrated antagonists in One Piece. But man, on the internet, how underrated is he, you ask? Well, we're going to find out, because we are on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the obese from the east, Kurozumi Orochi. And the first thing to note about Orochi is his absence in Act 1 of Wano. We don't actually meet Orochi until Act 2. However, we are introduced to him through the landscape of Wano as we explore during Act 1. The pollution, the starvation, and the complete erosion of life shows the threat and impact of Orochi far more effectively than the actual character is capable of doing himself. Let's drop this right now. The idea of Orochi is that he is a toxin, he is a poison, a parasite, a drain, a disease, and so many other nefarious symptoms. Orochi is all of them. Because Wano is another example of an arc with dual main antagonists, Kaido and Orochi. It's a revamp of the Water 7 duo of Rob Lucci and Spandam. Kaido is the big physical punch threat of the arc. He's the one who kept the island physically trapped and under control, but Orochi is the spiritual threat. He is the one rotting and eroding the spirit of Wano. And I do think that we really needed a character like this. Kaido himself never could have been an adequate assault on the spirit of Wano. We really did need someone who was native to the island to rot Wano from the inside whilst Kaido attacked it from the outside. And on the left side of Orochi's full introduction panel, when we do finally meet him in Act 2, is a short montage of Wano. We pan out from Orochi in the flower capital to the wastelands outside, filled with only dry bones and starving creatures, and then we go even further to the pollution-producing factories that are killing the land. Oda very consistently portrays Orochi as and juxtaposes him directly against a force of pollution. He is a toxin that has infected the very heart of Wano and is slowly strangling it. Orochi's size is also a very important factor in this. People of Wano are just naturally much bigger than regular humans in One Piece. However, Orochi is a step even above that. He dwarfs many of the already massive Wano citizens, and in wondrous Oda style, Orochi has grown outwards as much as he has upwards, making him look like a giant ball of greed. And he's usually accompanied by all sorts of lavish items. Orochi is surrounded by limitless food of all different types, as well as a legion of women to entertain him, including, if you look very closely on the left, Nico Robin in the guise of Orochi. But Orochi is almost like this black hole of resources. Everything on Wano is slowly getting sucked into him until there is nothing left. And we are very, very close to that point by the time this arc begins. But another very important factor is that Orochi's full introduction very much centers around Komurasaki, who is Kozuki Hiyori in disguise. And while Orochi's people are starving, he is obsessed with simping. And one beautiful thing about the Wano arc is that this is initially portrayed to us as pretty disgusting. Like, oh my god, poor woman being subjected to this man ball. Especially after we learn that Komurasaki is Hiyori, because how much worse can it get? You killed your father and now he's trying to do things. That's my YouTube friendly way of putting it. But there is a brilliant twist to this. At one point, Momonosuke states, if Hiyori's identity is known, Orochi will set his sights on her. And Hiyori's identity wasn't known, but Orochi still set his sights on her, because Orochi's obsession with Hiyori is part of a curse of fate. Orochi lives in a state of perpetual fear of the return of the Kozuki clan prophesied by Toki. Orochi is trying to run from it. He is trying to kill it. He is trying to erase the Kozuki name from everywhere he can, but he cannot do it. Orochi cannot escape the Kozuki curse. From the day that Odin died 20 years ago, Orochi's fate was sealed. And his obsession with Komurasaki is what eventually kills Orochi for good, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. Something that I really like about characters like Orochi is that they serve as artistic challenges for Oda, kind of like the opposite of the Boa Hancock problem. Oda has stated that Boa Hancock is by far the hardest character to draw in the series because he always needs to make sure that she looks like the most beautiful woman in the world. And on the other side of that scale is the Orochi class of characters who Oda always has to make look like the most putrid existences imaginable and continuously finding new ways to use them to disgust us. And one brilliant new way to do that would be child abuse. During Act 2, Orochi attempts to kill Toko after she laughs uncontrollably due to the smile fruit that he is responsible for infecting her with, which is a great little summary of Orochi. He's a compound poison that creates new problems out of his existing ones, and his execution of Yasu is a great example of the rot that Orochi was trying to inflict. Yasu was described as a saint of Wano, a man who, in a prelude to learning about the sun god Nika, inhabited Nika's qualities of always laughing, dancing, and keeping people's spirits high. And what makes Yasu particularly heartbreaking is that in the manga, it's assumed that he also ate a smile fruit and is laughing involuntarily, but his Vivier card reveals that Yasu did not eat a smile fruit. And so he's just playing along to show solidarity with Toko, and he is Abisu Town's only genuine source of joy. But either way, Yasu became the smiling, dancing spirit of Wano, the last thread of hope holding the soul of this island together, and Orochi killed him. And not only that, but he supplanted Yasu's genuine smile with his own smile. That's the spirit of my subjects. Laugh him into the afterlife. This is Wano. Bright, cheerful Wano. You might mistake it for paradise. And something that I've spoken about every now and then in this video series is the enduring battle of smiles that persists all across One Piece. It didn't just happen on Wano, it is a core motif. And the most dangerous of villains tend to be the ones who present themselves as corrupted joy boys, spreading suffering under the guise of joy, like Doflamingo building his own personal paradise of toy slaves on Dressrosa. And even though Orochi isn't a Luffy villain, he still falls into this category. He is morally one of the worst characters we've ever met, but I personally believe that Orochi is a far more interesting antagonist than Kaido, because Orochi is the one who gets the meat of the storytelling on Wano. And part of this is a surprisingly sympathetic flashback. This isn't Senor Pink levels of sympathy, nor would it excuse his actions if it was, but Orochi is a genuine victim. A long time ago, Orochi's grandfather, Kurozumi Granddaddy, attempted to poison his fellow daimyo in a bid to become shogun of Wano, but he was caught and forced to commit seppuku as punishment. Punishment, crime, and punishment. Quite simple, but that is not where it ended. As after the death of Kurozumi Grandpappy, the Kurozumi clan were hunted down and murdered by the citizens of Wano, even though they had nothing to do with the crime. And little child Orochi was one of those targets. And in this flashback panel, we see a woman running behind him that may well be his mother about to be captured and killed. Orochi spent his earliest years in the constant fear of being drowned in a river for something that he had nothing to do with. And this might be a stylistic choice for how Orochi perceived these people, but the Wano citizens are depicted as bloodthirsty monsters set on wiping out an entire group of people because they believe the entire Kurozumi clan to be a poison on Wano itself. And that did become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Orochi was treated like a monstrous poison that needed to be eradicated, and so Orochi became a monstrous poison to take vengeance on the island. In the interest of some fairness, I should say that Kurozumi Higurashi and Semimaru were almost certainly all on board with the original poisoning plan, and were also more objectively evil characters, which Orochi turned into, but he started out as a completely innocent child. What happened to him wasn't done by Kaido, it wasn't done by the force of any outsider, it was done by Wano itself. The manifestation of Orochi is this island reaping what it sowed. And by the time the Straw Hats get to Wano, there's only 2 living Kurozumi clan members left, Orochi and Tama, whose full name is Kurozumi Tama. So this entire clan was pretty successfully hunted, beaten, and then drowned in a river. And you know, look, if that had happened to my family, I'm honestly not sure if I would have the mental fortitude to not devolve into an Orochi-style quest for revenge. And to his credit, this was something that Kozuki Oden rather sympathized with, as part of his naked dancing was intended to be an apology to the Kurozumi clan, because Oden did feel sympathy for what happened to Orochi, as well as the responsibility to rectify it as heir to the Kozuki clan that allowed it to happen to begin with, although no apology was ever going to be enough for Orochi. And to him, the purpose of having Oden dance in the street for 5 years was to slowly but permanently erode the spirit of Wano. It wouldn't do a whole lot of good to kill Oden right then and there, it would just make him a martyr, and if anything, enhance the spirit of Wano. So Orochi needed to have people lose their faith in Oden and to turn him into the same fool that he was labeled as. In fact, when Oden returns to Wano and discovers what Orochi did, he writes in his journal, "I just know this, a fool has taken control of Wano, a weak, cowardly fool using the strength of a fearsome pirate." And so Orochi flips that by turning Oden into the fool, and he even becomes known as the Fool of a Lord by all of Wano, very successfully weakening and almost completely breaking the spirit of the country. The return of Kozuki Oden, rightful heir of Wano, had been the country's final hope, but the people's hopes were betrayed, and their great disappointment eventually turned to anger. But I want to emphasize that it weakened the spirit, it did not destroy it, because the disease of Orochi was never going to be enough to fully break Wano, with Odin's presence and ultimate execution being like a vaccine designed to protect the spirit for the next 20 years. Those who watched Odin boiling and holding up his vassals for one whole hour, and those who heard about it afterwards, ensured that the spirit of Wano would be permanently inoculated against Orochi. He could torture them, he could destroy their land, he could kill them, but for 2 whole decades, the only thing that Orochi could not do was extinguish the spirit of Wano. Kaido even said that people would speak of Odin's spectacular death for years to come, and Odin's reply was, "They can forget me for all I care, my soul will live on." And in the same way that Odin persevered in boiling oil for an hour, Wano would persevere for the next 20 years. A very serious solution required to combat a very serious threat, because Orochi was such an incredibly dangerous man to Odin. Physically, yeah, he's no threat, even with a mythical Zoan fruit, but Shinobu described Orochi as a, quote, agent of vengeance with no interest in the good of the country, which meant that far more would be lost by confronting Orochi in physical combat because of how happy he was to blow everything up. And he even had, at all times, a horde of hostages ready to kill in case Odin acted up. And so Odin saw it as in the best interest of the country to bide his time and acquiesce to Orochi's demands, and every day of naked dancing ended up saving 100 lives. Odin danced once a week, so all in all, over 5 years, Kozuki Odin saved 26,000 lives. But I do have to give Orochi that credit as a villain. He was able to force Odin to fight on a very different battlefield. And the threat he posed to Wano was arguably greater than the threat the crocodile posed to Alabasta or Doflamingo to Dressrosa. It really was quite an antagonistic achievement. However, I will say that Orochi may have lived 20 years longer, but he was defeated on the same day that Odin died, as Odin actually ended up poisoning Orochi as well. Orochi may have boiled Odin, but Odin chilled Orochi's soul. No matter how hot the water was, Orochi wasn't able to warm himself in a bath because of the thought of the Kozuki clan. A thought that again he tried and failed to eradicate and escape from for the next 20 years. And maybe, just maybe, Orochi should have saved us a lot of effort and tried to warm himself in the pot of oil. He may as well have, because after this point there was nothing that Orochi was capable of doing to complete his vengeance. Again, Wano was already inoculated. And that's why Orochi becomes something of a non-entity during the raid of Onigashima, which is a massive chunk of the Wano arc, almost half of it, and Orochi's fade from relevance commences the moment that he is decapitated by Kaido and loses one of his many heads. The reasoning for this is that Orochi's purpose no longer matters to Kaido, but it also no longer matters to us as readers, because as soon as the raid actually begins and all of the vassals appear to attack, it becomes clear that Orochi had already been beaten 20 years ago. He was supposed to break the spirit of Wano, but it endured, and here we are 20 years later with all of the vassals reassembled and over 5,000 samurai leading the largest scale rebellion in the island's history, all to restore the Kozuki clan helmed by Momonosuke. The spirit of Wano endured and Orochi was completely beaten, which is why the vassals are so dismissive of him when they find Orochi and cut off another 6 of his heads. "We have no time to waste on the likes of you, Orochi. Your judgment will be served to you in hell." And it's not that Orochi is completely irrelevant going forward, especially because he does have that one last gasp with Kanjuro, but his endemic has been dealt with, and all that's really left is to clean up and eradicate, which is a task handled by Hiyori and Denjiro after Orochi is lured in by the Kozuki curse. He gets enchanted by the visage of Komurasaki, the obsession that would end up killing him with his final head being sliced off and becoming one of the very rare antagonists, or indeed characters in general, to be straight up killed off in One Piece. And despite being so rare, this wasn't a grand moment at all, which you can very much feel because it plays out side by side with Luffy defeating Kaido. Orochi's defeat and his death is very simple, even casual, and that is exactly what he deserved, as all throughout Wano his threat continues to diminish and fizzle out, having been poisoned by Odin 20 years ago, and it ended up being that enduring spirit of Odin that vanquished Orochi once and for all through Hiyori and Denjiro to save the spirit of the island, whilst elsewhere Odin's legacy was also defeating Wano's physical threat with Momonosuke assisting Luffy. However, the true end to Orochi happens right at the conclusion of Wano. One of our final shots of this arc is Hiyori performing a show and stating that Orochi was born to burn. More accurately, Kurozumi was born to burn, which is quite clever on many levels. One, because it's it's a pun on the famous Oden line of being born to boil, and 2 because Kurozumi means black charcoal. So charcoal was born to burn. However, this line received quite a bit of controversy when the chapter first came out, because the unofficial English translation translated this line as the Kurozumi were born to burn, implying Kurozumi plural. And part of this happened because it's often difficult to tell singular and plural apart in Japanese without strong context, and the English scans chose plural, which was a disaster because it implied that Hiyori was advocating for the burning of all of the Kurozumi, which is the exact mindset that inspired Orochi to begin with, and also the only surviving Kurozumi we have is Tama. However, this was cleared up by the official translation, which had Hiyori say, Kurozumi was born to burn, confirming that she was talking about Orochi singular. Now, certain fan translations have tried to, quote, fix this line because they still don't see it as good enough, such as the following: Kurozumi Orochi, charcoal like you is only worthy when it burns, which is just stupid and clunky and takes away from the reference to Oden. But English troubles aside, I really like this full stop on Orochi, because it was never enough to just physically beat him. We had to eradicate his toxin from the soul of Wano. And so Hiyori creating a show that will no doubt be performed for hundreds, maybe thousands of years down the line, solidifies a complete purging of Orochi's influence from the culture of Wano. It lands very well for me, but I can see how it might not necessarily be shonen friendly. As comes up a lot in this video series, One Piece is categorized as a battle manga, and so audience satisfaction with a character can often be directly tied to their action on page, and Orochi doesn't really have any action. He doesn't do any fights. He's not a villain that would traditionally land in a shonen series, at least not on his own, and Eiichiro Oda took a colossal risk by making Orochi the dual focus of Wano, an arc that lasted just over 4 years. And also, Orochi undergoes a reverse path as an antagonist. Generally, an arc builds towards a conflict with a final antagonist, and it ends rather explosively and climactically. But Orochi was a case where we work backwards. We start out strong, and over the course of Wano, Orochi disintegrates. Each passing chapter breaks him down further until he ends up as a literal pile of ash on the floor. And that was his whole purpose, to show the strength and will of Wano to resist Orochi's attack on the spirit of the island. And what Orochi does lack in traditional shonen qualities is made up for by Kaido. Because they're partners in this arc, you cannot talk about either one of them separately, even though that's exactly what we're doing right now and exactly what we will be doing with Kaido. But really, I don't have many bad things to say about Orochi as an antagonist. He does his job nigh on flawlessly. I think it would be very difficult to justify sticking him into the A tier or above, because that would be breaking into a legion of full package villains, but Orochi definitely deserves a B. He might not be to everyone's taste, but without him, the Wano arc would feel like a completely hollow and stale punch fest. Orochi is exactly what was needed to create and sustain the drama of the longest arc in One Piece, and you let me know in the comments which antagonist you'd like to see ranked next.